a negotiator for Hamas, a top leader in their Politburo, assassinated in Iran on July 31st. And then before that, we had Israel just the day before bombing Beirut in reaction to a very suspicious strike on the Golan Heights, which killed 12 people, many of them young people. Now we are also getting unconfirmed reports about a possible IRGC commander, Iranian commander, killed in Damascus. Sound familiar? Back in April, something of this sort happened, which led to an Iranian operation to deter Israel from further attacking. It was an Israeli attack on the embassy in Damascus back in April of 2024. These are unconfirmed reports so far. But Michael, maybe we can turn to you. How do you see it based on your geopolitical and economic analysis, this kind of spiraling, it seems, of Israel broadening this war to a regional and global level? Because, of course, we are also entering the 1 year point. We are getting very close to that 1 year point of the overall genocidal campaign in Gaza.
Well, you say Israel, but it's actually Israel in the United States. And all this has happened right after Netanyahu came to Congress and met with in Washington with the Democratic Party leaders and then with Trump. So I think it's really the policy of the neocons. They've worked hand in hand. And I've known these people for over 50 years. I worked with Netanyahu's advisor, Uzi Arad, for a number of years at the Hudson Institute. We made trips around the world together arguing, and I know what their ideas and ideology are. And it really is not only apartheid, but the feeling that if Israel doesn't kill the Palestinians will kill the Israelis in retaliation for what the Israelis are doing to them. And so once you hurt the Palestinians, that makes you think very much like what America thinks with Iran. Well, we look at what we've done to Iran. They must hate us. Therefore, they're going to do something about us. Therefore, we're going to attack them. So I think that the neocons in Washington believe that the war is going to be inevitable. America is fighting for control of the Near East because the Near East controls the oil. And American foreign policy has been based on control both of food supplies from American farm and control of the oil trade. Because if you can control the oil trade, you can turn off people's electricity, their heating, and their power. And power use per worker is the productivity. And I know the way that the military thinks, and again, I've worked with them for years, is the timing. That are we in a better position now than we will be next year or not? And I think the American military realizes that Russia and China and the other Eurasian countries are getting together. The American ability to fight militarily is going down. And to the military, that means if we don't have war now and wait till next year in the future, we'll be less and less and less able to win. Well, the reality is they're going to lose wherever they go, unless there's atomic war and the chessboard is thrown over. And I think their feeling is the Americans are doing everything they can, from Ukraine to Israel to Iran, to try to stir up a retaliation so that they can then say, we're under attack, we're defending ourselves, and once you tell your population and your voters, this is a war for defense, the Nazis knew, you can always get as Goebbels said, you can always get a population on your side if you say it's for defense. So I'm very worried that the neocons are going to say there will never be a better, or at least a less worse time to go to war in the Near East than right now. That seems to be what is leading a trigger. And even though the military has said every way that they've gamed out the military sequence there, America loses, they're not going to lose as bad now as they will in the future. And this is very dangerous given the whole mindset that they have and the mindset that they have to control the Near East or else the rest of the world will not be neoliberalized. It's really, we're at a civilizational split. What kind of society and what kind of economy will the world have? Will it be a neoliberalized, privatized economy, or will it be, I hesitate to say socialized, let's just say a progressive, real kind of democracy economy?
Before I get you in here, Jill, I just want to correct myself. It's Ismail Hania. I'm probably still butchering the name, but I wanted to make sure I corrected that before I give it to you, Dr. Stein, please.
Yeah, and I would add to what Michael said. It's not only what kind of world we're going to have, but whether we're going to have a world or not, because, you know, the words of Martin Luther King ring truer than ever. My country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. You know, true back in the 60s, all the more true now. And echoing what you said, Danny, or actually, I think it was what Michael said also, that this is not just Israel. This is Israel enabled, empowered, funded, and armed by the US of A. So we are deeply embroiled in this. And clearly what Netanyahu is doing is, you know, this screams as an effort to prolong and expand the war and to drag the US into it. It will be very hard for the US not to be dragged into it, because Israel is simultaneously attacking, Yemen. Just the other day, a really severe attack on one of Yemen's key ports. I mean, they've been bombing Yemen for some time in retaliation to Yemen's efforts to, stop the genocide and stop the flow of weapons and materials that support the genocide. And Israel has been responding in kind. And worse, basically, with, bombing Yemen. And then there's been a big push on that bombing just last week. And then now within 24 hours, you have back-to-back assassinations that really look tailor-made to further escalate. And, in particular, assassinating the head of negotiations for Hamas. How are we supposed to be, and how is Israel supposed to be negotiating a peace deal when they are assassinating the spokesperson and the key figure in that in those negotiations? So this is designed, until proven otherwise, this is designed to completely torpedo negotiations to ensure that the war goes on, and in fact it escalates, because you have not only this assassination, but it's happening in Iran. And there was another big offense against Iran by Israel a couple months back, when Israel took on this, incredible, inflammatory action, a war crime, bombing Iran's embassy in Syria, I believe. I'm sorry. Yes, it was Iran's embassy. Yes. Yeah. In Syria, and there were like 13 people killed then, and that was responded to by Iran with a retaliation of some 300 drones and missiles, which was less than it could have been. It could have been much more, and they had a relatively contained response, but that was so insane. And what was the U.S. response to that? It was like nothing, no even slap on the hands, no demand for an apology, nothing. The U.S. has been really in full support, enabling Israel's very offensive and escalatory actions. So you have that going on at the same time. With this back-to-back assassination, bombing an intensely dense area in Beirut, where some 70 people were injured. Reportedly, there were only 4 deaths, but it's hard to believe that if 70 people were injured, there were only 4 deaths. We'll see, what the numbers eventually turn out to be. But you have Israel sort of simultaneously provoking all of its adversaries in the region. It's going to war now intensively against Lebanon and Hezbollah in Lebanon, against Iran, against the Houthis in Yemen, and this is outrageous, especially in the wake of Congress having invited this war criminal, murderer, to come, having applauded him, standing ovations, practically one a minute for the entire hour of his speech. Instead of applauding Netanyahu, the U.S. should have been arresting Netanyahu and turning him over to The Hague to be tried for war crimes. And, the U.S. is probably next on the docket here, because we are egging him on. We're encouraging him. What Congress did was, essentially to give him a complete blank check to keep going. And it was not long ago that the U.S. Congress and White House basically appropriated another $18 billion worth of F-15 fighter jets at U.S. taxpayer expense. And this was after, the explosion of Israeli aggression in the south of Gaza. And Israel has just been on kind of a nonstop series of massacres. Talk about children and the deaths of children that Israel is supposedly defending. Israel has been wiping out children, to the tune of some 16,000 recorded deaths, but it's likely way more than that, far more, as indicated by the report from the Lancet journal, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that a total of some 40,000 deaths is probably more like approaching 200,000 deaths, actually, considering, how the numbers are counted and not counted. And among them, are all these child-directed assaults, on soccer fields, on schools, on refugee centers. It's just shocking and horrific what's going on. And in the middle of that, the U.S. rewards Israel with another $18 billion worth of these F-15 fighter jets. So the U.S. has blood all over its hands, not just on its hands, but, on its face, from head to toe. Basically, the U.S. is conducting this genocide. And we heard recently some, warm words for the suffering of the Palestinian people from Kamala Harris. But these are absolutely empty gestures, because the U.S. has the capability of stopping the genocide with a phone call or simply by curtailing the weapons, which, by the way, are illegal. It breaks 3 U.S. laws to be sending weapons to Israel at this point. So it's a simple matter to stop the flow of weapons and to even make the phone call saying, you're done. You are basically disarmed now and going forward, barring an end to the genocide and an end to the aggressive actions that Israel is taking in order to defend its right to conduct genocide. So this is all of this is being enabled and empowered and intensified by the U.S. So in my view, this is a time, to to double down, to arrest Netanyahu, to send him to The Hague, to stop the flow of weapons, and to actually join our campaign, which is challenging empire. Without a challenge, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand.
Michael, I wanted to bring you back in here too about a point that Jill Stein made around the U.S.'s involvement here with regard to this crisis, this growing, this spiraling, this growing threats of a broader war out of the genocide in Gaza. And I wanted to ask you about the U.S.'s, how there's been a lot of activity. On the one hand, the U.S. says the what remains of the Biden administration has said that they're not involved in what happened in Iran, right? The assassination of the Hamas leader. That they're trying to keep Israel from extending the war into Lebanon against Hezbollah. But maybe you could outline a bit, like, why does the U.S., because at the end of the day, in the final analysis, it appears that the U.S. actually does support all of what Israel does, either by vocally supporting it, materially supporting it, or both. Words seem to not matter very much here. It really does have to do with the action. So could you talk about why, from your standpoint, the U.S. is supporting this conflagration, this expansion of the war, as well as the genocide?
Well, it's very simple. Jill said at the beginning of her talk, and I agree with her, not only Netanyahu and the Israelis should be counted as war criminals, but so should the Biden administration, Blinken and Sullivan. So what the U.S. does, for public relation purposes, it knows just what Jill said. The majority of American people don't want the war, either in Ukraine or in the Near East. So the pretense is to shed crocodile tears and said, oh, we told Netanyahu not to drop the bombs on Gaza and kill civilians. Oh, by the way, here's every single day, every bomb is an American bomb that it continues to be sent. And as Jill said, this could all be stopped in one telephone call. So that all these are American bombs. The administration is trying to pretend good cop and bad cop. The U.S. is the good cop trying to stop it, but the U.S. is the supporter of Israel. And I won't simply say Israel. It's really the Likud party. It's not the Labor, the old Labor Party of the progressive Israelis. This is the right-wing Likud party, the ultra-right party that the United States is supporting. And that AIPAC is supporting with its donations to Congress, not to Jill's campaign. So this is just all smoke and pretense. Now, of course, we would have liked to have seen some congressmen, and I think one of the congressmen said they wished they could have gone across the stage, shaken Mr. Netanyahu's hand and put into it a subpoena to put him under arrest. But the International Court has not yet issued an arrest warrant. So you can't arrest somebody without a warrant for their arrest. That's what we're waiting for. And if they can issue the warrant against the arrest of the Israeli leadership, they can do it against the U.S. leadership, which is their sponsors. The pretense or the claim is simply that, oh, Israel has bought the U.S. Congress through its campaign contributors, but there's a circular flow. Congress will give aid to Israel. Israel will use some of the aid it gets to pay back into the lobbying effort to pay the congressmen. So everything, some portion of whatever they give Israel ends up in their own pockets. That's the circular flow we have, thanks to Citizens United and related things. So you're having a whole system that is so dysfunctional that I think a lot of American voters think there's nothing we can do. The system is so corrupt. There is something we can do, and I think that's what Jill has been trying to explain in her campaign, which somehow does not make it into the New York Times or the Washington Post.
And definitely. And I wanted to, Jill, also ask you, given what Michael said and given what you said about your campaign here, could you talk about, the United States? I think one of the biggest ways that the United States maintains this like plausible deniability is, on the one hand, it poses itself as some kind of diplomatic force mediator between Hamas and Israel, and it has been trying to at least play this role, or play at this role, I should say, since the initial talks about a so-called ceasefire began. But I'm wondering, Hamas, considered a terrorist organization, Hezbollah, considered a terrorist organization, Iran, considered an adversary, the entire axis of resistance, considered an adversary. How do you differ in terms, because, we have Kamala Harris, we have Donald Trump. They don't deviate from these positions at all. How do you differ in how you would relate to these forces, which they're all saying that they are opposing the genocide and coming to the aid of the Palestinians? How would you relate to them if you were in that position that the U.S. claims it is now, and that these two parties claim they're in now?
So, they claim that they oppose the genocide, but it's pure talk. They have the power to stop the genocide immediately. And on day one, my administration would make that phone call and the war is over with that phone call. And this was done by Ronald Reagan, not exactly your model of a peace president, who picked up the phone and called Menachem Begin, I think it was at the time, and said, bring your troops back from Lebanon, where Israel had gone in pursuit of the, terror organization du jour, and Israel has its du jour, its terrorist of the day, on whom resistance is blamed, but resistance is inevitable. Resistance will happen when people are being murdered as a way of life, when you have a murderous occupation and apartheid state, when people are basically being allowed food and water out of an eyedropper. Everything coming into Gaza has been strictly controlled, basically to just barely maintain a survival level of calorie intake. The incredible violence that people have been subjected to routinely, and, periodic massacres that have been the track record, actually, of the Zionist state since even before it declared independence. There were some 400 or 500 villages that had been basically destroyed. So, this was hardwired into the plan. And many people don't know that, because it was only with the revelations in the Israel's National Historic Archives that became available to historians in the 1990s. So there was a whole new analysis by Israeli historians, actually, of Israel's history, and it became very clear, what has been going on here from the get-go. So, all well and good to blame the resistance of the day, but you're going to have resistance as long as you have systematic ethnic cleansing, periodic massacres, and just the murderous way of life of an apartheid state. People from South Africa who fought the apartheid state in South Africa say that it was mild, it was modest compared to the violence of the Israeli apartheid. So it doesn't matter what you call it. If you want to solve this crisis, you have to get to the underlying drivers of the crisis, which is essentially the occupation, the apartheid state, and essentially, the blueprint of the Zionist plan here, which has been murderous, actually, and terrorist from its inception. So let's just solve the problem. And let's also understand that this is not only a problem for Palestine, this is also a survival problem for Israel. There's no way that Israel gets out of here alive, having basically amped up its neighbors who are stronger than Israel. When you combine Iran and Hezbollah, and then, other partners, and potentially Russia, which is in a military alliance with Iran, which also has nuclear weapons. And Israel, of course, has nuclear weapons in violation of the non-proliferation treaty. Israel also has those weapons. It raises real questions about, so what do you do? How do you force a regime that has shown every indication of being psychopathic, and how do you stop them? So you basically disarm them. You disarm them by ending the flow of weapons. And further, you institute an economic boycott, which could be done right now. And, the basis for that is there in the second ICJ ruling, which essentially said that occupation and apartheid is absolutely illegal. And it's, it's necessary to take all conceivable measures to correct that. So it really does lay the groundwork and justify a national boycott. And those boycotts actually are being quite effective right now. This is another way in which Israel does not get out of here alive, because the economic toll on Israel right now is enormous. The cost of this war is huge. Israel has lost a lot of its business. Its tourist industry has completely come to a screeching halt. One of its major ports had to shut down because there's so much, commercial, engagement that's just not happening anymore. So for the people of Israel, not the apartheid state, but for the people of Israel, this is absolutely essential too, for us to put an end to this. And yes, Israel has nuclear weapons, but you don't need nuclear weapons to basically create an economic boycott here. And that can happen. I don't think that needs to happen if our leadership would simply stand up and do like Ronald Reagan did, or like Dwight Eisenhower did many decades earlier, I think in the 1950s, when Dwight Eisenhower basically made that phone call as well and told not only Israel, but I think also France and possibly Egypt. No, they were in Egypt. Yes, and he recalled Israel and company from Egypt, and that likewise had an immediate turnaround. So the U.S. has all the power. This is not rocket science about how to solve this. This is simply a matter of re-engaging our democracy and political empowerment that demands that we have elected officials who are serving us, not serving the military industrial complex, the war contractors, the fossil fuel industry, APAC, et cetera. This is about simply doing the bidding of the American people in a way that protects us all, that ends the impoverishment and the endangerment of all of us at the way that our foreign policy is currently being conducted.
Michael, I wanted to ask to get you back in here about the ramifications of what we've seen in the last few days, and whether you feel like a broader war indeed could come out of this, because as Dr. Stein has mentioned, the last time that Israel struck inside of Iranian territory, inside of that struck Iran from Damascus, they struck Iran through the embassy and killed a top IRGC commander. The last time, and top IRGC commanders, the last time that happened, Iran did engage in a very open, there was a lot of communication with the United States, but they did engage in a deterrence operation. Now, with this huge figure, I mean, Ismail Haniyeh is a huge figure here. He is someone who is tasked with negotiations, and it seems like it's sending a huge message to do it within Iran. Do you feel like Iran may respond here in kind? And we haven't even gotten to Hezbollah. So do you feel like this war is coming, or do you feel like how do you assess this situation going forward?
Well, what Iran did was to show that it could bomb precision bombs American bases in Syria and in Iraq. It told America the bombs are coming, try to defend yourself. It very carefully avoided hitting any American soldiers there. Just wanted to demonstrate, do you really want war? Here's what we can do. Hezbollah did exactly the same thing with Israel. It showed that it could penetrate the Iron Dome at will, and that it had its aerial, a complete control of the aerial air over Israel. They are doing everything they can to stay out of the war because they realize that the United States and Israel, but really the United States, is trying to goad them into war. And you realize that if someone has declared themselves as your enemy, and if they're trying to goad you into war, they must have a plan that, like in the old Western, you'll have the gunslinger that's a good fast draw, trying to goad some local guy into pulling his gun, and then the gunslinger shoots him first. I think that that's what Iran and Hezbollah realize. They're doing everything to stay out. And as I look at it, they're very much in the position of President Putin in Russia. They're amazingly patient. Mm-hmm. They know that America wants to accelerate war and wants a war now, and that it's all set up for it, probably with really, really big weapons that are going to be more violent than anything we've seen since World War II. And these other countries are not responding to the goading. What they're doing is making alliances with each other, just as Russia and China have admitted Iran into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasia's version of NATO. The other countries are solidifying their mutual support so that they can be independent, not only of the United States, but of the United States and NATO, the whole NATO West. So they're saying, well, what we're trying to do is let the West go its way. We'll go our way. We're going to have a different kind of economy than the West. We're back into what this fight is really about. Is for what kind of society and what kind of civilization are we going to have? Will it be neoliberal, privatized, all centered in one country, the United States, or will it be a multilateral, win-win, non-exploitive economy of mutual gain? Because mutual gain is the only way that you can get other countries to join. And that's what Eurasia is doing in Africa and other Asian countries to make alliances. They're solidifying the alliances. And in fact, the American challenge to them is driving them into a mutual alliance. So they're looking at the long term. America's looking at what can we do in the short term. It's really a fight in a world view that we're seeing right now. And I suspect that they're going to be patient enough not to do anything as long as they can restrain themselves from the kind of provocation that the United States is doing all the way from the Near East to Ukraine.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.